Welcome back. What I have here on screen is a copy-pasted directory called event emitters, copy-pasted from our previous video. And here's the button class we had worked on. So this button class, as you can see, when we instantiate it, we just get a plain old JavaScript object, right? It's not extending anything basically. Instead, it is using one of its properties is an image, img. It's an image phaser game object, and because it's a game object, we're able to do .on to register our interest in listening for certain events, right? But .on though is not coming directly from the game object; it's coming from event emitter. The reason why we have it available on any game object is because game objects in Phaser, they extend from event emitter. In fact, if I go and find it in the source code here under Phaser, and if I go and find Phaser source game object.js, I see here that it extends the event emitter, right? And if I go to the event emitter, it's being basically imported from event emitter tree, which is an external library to Phaser. So yeah, the syntax here might be a bit different. Okay, it is different, and the reason is that basically Phaser was written before JavaScript supported classes natively. So this is how they're implementing it over here. But at the end of the day, what that means is that if I go back to button here, I'm able to do these .on to register a callback to fire to run when the pointer over, for example, event gets fired by Phaser internally, right? By the input manager. So that is what we currently have, and we have the same approach with the checkboxes, right? They're all just plain old JavaScript objects. But now, what if we wanted to register our interest in any of these events from outside of button, right? So if I go to my main menu scene here, and if I were to now do button try to do on it, for example, pointer down, this won't work in the main menu. Button click, this won't even allow me here. It will error out straight away saying that property on does not exist on type button. Of course it doesn't, because it's just a plain old JavaScript object, and we have not defined any on inside that class, right? So to actually get this to work, I would have to reference its internal image game object. Now it would be able to work. And so now when I click on it, as you can see, I have the new console.log in main menu. So this works just fine. The only problem with this, which you may be okay with, but we're accessing the internals of the class, right? It doesn't mean you can never do that. Okay, you can if your situation warrants that, if you've decided that's what you want to do. But an alternative approach would be to just why not just make button the game object, right? Why have an image property in here? All we're doing is we're wrapping around it, right? And if we go, in fact, we go to read a bit the documentation here. So you are meant to extend these classes, right? This is the game object itself, but there's also an image game object which extends from game object, right? So this, if I go to Phaser src game objects image.js, that's where the image game object itself, what the image property here and button is, that's where that's defined, and it is extending from game object, and then game object in turn is extending from event emitter. So it ends up being that image is an event emitter as well, basically. And so what if we just extend the image game object, right? We're told here that you don't create game objects directly, and they cannot be added to the display list. Instead, use them as the base for your own custom classes. Basically, this is the one I wanted to highlight. So these are meant to be, you're meant to extend game objects, create. You're meant to extend Phaser's game objects to create your own. So if I go over here and I actually do that, so the first thing you'll notice, it auto-did this for me, but here I had type on the input of game objects, but since I'm now using it as a value, that type needs to go away, right? I need to import this as a value. And what I'm doing basically here, I just started saying that this button extends from Phaser's image game object. I don't need this anymore then, because the button itself is the game object. I won't need to create it here with the factory, right? So I'll take that out. You can still keep it interactive. However, I don't want to obviously reference the removed image here. So what I'm going to do is I'll go through this. Now there's one other thing that's missing, and this applies to whenever you're extending any game objects. You should call super. So you should basically call the constructor of the thing you're extending. And in this case, I'm just passing in the same things that button itself receives, right? So with that, the refactor is complete. And if I do go here, now I don't need to reference its .image. I could just button.onPointer down straight away. And let me just change the message a bit. Of course. And now, so now that here's something else I wanted to talk about. So you remember when we were creating this, right? We used the this.add or scene.add, right? Let me bring this back. And I added the image basically using the factory. Now this does a couple of things. Apart from creating the game object, it also adds it to the display list, to the scenes display list, right? So every scene in Phaser has a display list. And when we create it this way via the object factory, game object factory, it will automatically do it for us, the addition of the newly created game object into the scenes display list. And when we're doing it this way, right, when we're creating the game object ourselves, it's not being added to any scenes display list. So in fact, if I go here and I do have a reference to button, right? I have a reference to it on the window object, so I can do button.displayList to query basically in which display list is this game object, this button image game object, in which display list has it been added. It's telling me none, so it hasn't been added to any display list. Whereas if I go on the checkbox one, for example, checkbox 2 here, the checkbox 2 is using the scene.add image, right? So we're creating the same image game object. In fact, it's doing 2 actually over here. Because it's using the this factory, right? The game object factory, right? That's what the .add is a reference to in scene. Then it gets auto-added to the scenes display list. And if I query checkbox 2, because of course I need to actually reference a game object within checkbox 2, because checkbox 2 is just a plain old. So to query in which display list the checkbox empty image or the tick image is added, I would do tick image dot display list, and then it's telling me, hey, I've been added to this display list, and has a reference to its scene, right? The main menu scene. And so that's why we would need to now add the button manually, basically. I will get back to this. So the events are still firing on this. But before that, let me just refresh your memory when we had implemented the dummy phaser, right? This was our game loop. I just want to highlight that in our game loop, one of the steps was to get the current scene together, to reference its display list, and to draw anything inside the display list, right? So that's the Phaser is doing something similarly, basically under the hood. And now back to why we still get these events, hover on and whatnot, because we have set interactive on it, right? And so the inputs will be, events will be firing on it because we've registered it as we said, okay, this game object, we're interested in inputs on it, right? By setting interactive. If we didn't want that, we would remove the set interactive and maybe add it when we're ready to display it. And once we've removed the set interactive, as you can see, no more of hovering over. I mean, still get the other ones for the checkbox, but when I'm hovering over where the button should be, I don't get those on hover, right? Which I do now. I pointer over, pointer out. All right, so to actually add our game object to the display list, so back to our main menu, I can add now the new, I have the game object in memory at this point, but to actually add it now, I'm in the scene, so I can just do this dot add dot existing. And now I should just be able to reference the button itself. To add it, since the button is the game object, I can add the game object to this scene's display list, right? Using this API, this dot add dot existing. Using that, now I have the button showing up. So that's the way you would do it when you will when you're extending a game object directly, right? Because we're extending the game object, we are in charge of creating the game object, and so then we are in charge of adding it to the display list. So now for a quick little exercise, I would like you to emit a custom event from button. What I'll do first is I'll remove these console.logs. And I'd like you to emit using the API given that the button is a game object, right? It's also an event emitter, and it can use the emit method to emit a custom, let's just call it click, for example, or let's call it click even. I would like you to basically keep counter and every even count to emit this event, right? And we will listen to that in the main menu. Okay, so pause the video and give that a go. Okay, so doing this should be quite straightforward. All we really need to do is keep track of the count. We'll just add a new instance variable for that, and on click down, we will increment it. And if the count modulo 2 is equal to 0, that means it's even, right? So we've imagine if count were 10, for example, and divided by 2, the remainder would be 0, right? That's all it's doing. Whereas if the count were 9 divided by 2, the remainder would be 1. And so that it would not be even. You would not go inside this if statement. So that's all we're doing over here. We're just emitting click even. And so now back in our main menu, instead of listening to pointer down, I can listen to click even event, which is the event we're firing, and log this out. So now if I click once, nothing happens, but if I click a second time, I get the log message. If I click again, nothing. I click a fourth time, and I see it was logged twice, the same message in the DevTools. So now back to checkbox. I'd like to show an alternate approach. Instead of extending a game object, what you can do is you can extend the events.event emitter directly. So I bring in events from Phaser. I can subclass event emitter and then call its constructor with super, taking no arguments. Everything else can remain the same. We still want the game object, right, to show the checkbox. And basically now I can emit events directly from the checkbox, right? So remember the issue was that I did not want in main menu to stay doing, where was it? Button.image.on, right? I wanted the button itself to be the thing I listen to. And similarly now for checkbox, I don't want to stay doing checkbox.image.on. I want to listen to changes, listen to events on the checkbox itself. and we will define then this event soon. So let's go back to checkbox, and now that it's an event emitter, what I could do over here, first of all, I'll get rid of the console log. And now, as you can see, when it's checked, we are deriving this based on the image texture, right? So after the image texture is set in the on pointer down, right? So we're already listening to the pointer down event fired by Phaser, and we're handling it within the checkbox. And I want to now basically emit another event, a custom one, from here. And I can do that using the same API, this.emit. So what I'll do is do this.emit. For example, my custom event name would be something like is sound enabled. What I can do here is pass in an argument of this.isChecked. And so, yeah, we can pass in basically as many arguments as we want. I can also pass in hello, for example, here. And now, basically, when I go back to my main menu, I can register my interest from main menu to listen to the is sound enabled event. And I will get the arguments I passed in, right? So is sound enabled. I can bind the variable is sound enabled to the first argument I'm sending to the second argument, technically, that I'm sending to the emit, right? And I could also log this one out, hello, by binding it to extra arg. And so now if I find my checkbox one, which is this one, I should be able to, when it's ticked, get the is sound enabled of true and the hello arg I'm passing in every time. And when it's ticked off, basically I can get the false value. So that's another way of doing it. Just remove the extra hello argument. It's important to keep in mind, though, that when you're doing it this way, that the checkbox itself is not a game object, right? It has the game object within it. It's being the checkbox is rendering because we are creating the game object via scene.add, as we've seen, right? This is automatically adding it to the scenes display list. And that, for example, now, if from the main menu I wanted to actually listen to this event, right? Well, this class checkbox isn't ever emitting this event. The image game object is. So you wouldn't be able to, if I go back to main menu, I cannot do this. I cannot do checkbox dot on listen to the pointer down event, which ends up being something like pointer down, this string pointer down, you know. In fact, if I can try binding this to a function that's and as you'll see that when I click, we only get these is sound enabled true or false messages. The extra arg isn't being passed in anymore, so I should delete that. And yeah, if I wanted to do this, if I wanted to actually listen to the pointer down, I would have to then go within the interiors, right? I would have to reference the game object, basically, and listen to register my interest on the pointer down on the image game object. And so now we are expecting it to log in this case. So that's important to keep in mind. That is to say, it's important to know when you're working with game objects versus when you're not working with game objects. Because as we'll see in the next video, game objects get cleared out when you're, for example, transitioning from one scene to another. If you shut down one scene and you start another, then game objects in the previous scene's display lists get their shutdown method called automatically by Phaser, which ends up removing any event listeners you may have registered on them. So on button, and button is a game object, right? We're back over here. It's extending the game object.image. Then the button.on, I've registered this function to fire, right? And that if this scene, the main menu scene were being shut down, gets this event listener gets automatically cleaned up by Phaser. Whereas for checkbox, because checkbox does not extend the game object, it does not. It extends event emitter, but event emitters don't get added to a scene's display list. So Phaser wouldn't know which list, basically. It can go iterate through and call shutdown on, right? And shutdown internally for the game objects, they have a remove all listeners, basically. But we'll talk more about that in the next video.